They said no one made it out alive from the Henderson barn fire. The wind had howled too fierce that night, licking at the dry timbers like a starving wolf. And by morning, all that remained was ash and silence. But Silas Boone knew that wasn't quite true, because he'd carried a woman out of those flames with his own 2 arms. And she hadn't said a single word since Dot. It had been near midnight when the sky over Rockbend lit up like a second sunrise. Silas had just returned to his cabin from tending cattle out past the ridge, saddle-sore and bone-tired. Then he saw a orange light flaring beyond the trees, and the thick smoke rising above the pine. His boots hit the ground before his horse had even stopped moving. When he reached the barn, the roof had already caved in. Flames licked the sky, and the stench of burning hay and wood was thick enough to choke. He didn't think, he just moved. The back door was half hanging off, and through the smoke he spotted her, crumpled, unmoving, covered in soot and sparks. He didn't know her name, just a shape in the fire. He lifted her up. She was too light, like the weight had already left her bones, and ran through the choking heat, with her against his chest. She didn't wake until dawn now. 2 days later, she sat, wrapped in a wool blanket on his front porch, eyes vacant, lips cracked. The doctor had come and gone, said the burns were shallow, nothing fatal. But Silas knew the hurt that didn't show on skin. He'd carried plenty of it himself. "You remember your name?" he asked gently, crouching down beside her. She shook her head. He offered a smile, soft and patient. "That's all right. Ain't no rush." The wind stirred her hair. It was once golden, he thought, beneath all the soot. She flinched at the crackle of the hearth inside, and that's when Silas knew someone had meant for her to burn. Back in town, the sheriff was already talking about faulty lanterns and dry timber, but Silas had seen the pattern. The fire had started low, fast, precise. Someone had lit it on purpose. He looked at the woman again, as glassy, hands trembling, and wondered who in hell would want her gone, and why she'd ended up in his arms, of all places. Later that evening, as snow drifted outside and the wind sighed through the eaves, Silas sat across from her with 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table. She hadn't touched hers. She just kept staring into the flames of the hearth like they might speak some truth. "I found a ribbon," he said softly, "in your coat pocket. Red one, looked like something a girl might wear to a dance." She blinked, slowly. "I also found a silver locket, empty inside. No name." For the first time she looked at him, really looked. There was something there, deep fear, but also recognition, like his voice had reached into a place she didn't know still existed. "My name," she whispered, voice cracked and hoarse, ... "is June." Silas leaned forward, heart thudding. "June, what?" But she just looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Out in the darkness, a lone coyote howled. Silas felt the old ache stir in his chest, the one he thought he'd buried with his brother 3 winters back. He didn't know what he was getting pulled into, but something told him June hadn't just survived a fire, she'd escaped a secret that still had teeth, and it was only a matter of time before it came looking. What do you all think June's running from? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow, for this story's just warming up. Hit that bell so you don't miss what happens when the past knocks on Silas's door. June hadn't slept a single night since the fire. Silas knew, because he hadn't either. Every time the cabin creaked or the wind whistled through the chinks in the log wall, she'd sit up straight, gasping like someone still trapped in a burning room. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, but her eyes, they looked like they'd seen something that wouldn't let go. Silas tried not to push. The mountains had taught him that you couldn't force truth out of silence. Sometimes it had to come slow, like Thor from the long winter. Still, it wasn't easy, watching her drift like a ghost in his small world. On the 4th morning, just as dawn broke pale and gold across the snowbanks, she asked, barely above a whisper, "Is this place far from town?" Silas looked up from chopping kindling, pausing mid-swing. "About 6 miles, maybe 7, if the trail's muddy. Does anyone know I'm here?" He set the hatchet down slowly. "Just Doc Harlan. I didn't mention your name, 'cause you didn't have one to give." June nodded, staring off toward the woods. "Good." Silas waited, let the silence fill the space between them like warm smoke, and then she spoke again, so soft he almost didn't catch it. "There was a man at the barn before it burned." He stepped closer. "You saw him?" Her voice was dry, brittle. "I heard his boots on the floorboards. He was humming." Silas felt something crawl up his spine. "Do you remember the tune?" June shook her head. "But I think I think I knew him once." They stood there in the cold light, the fire inside the cabin crackling low, and Silas saw the way her shoulders curled in on themselves, like she'd spent years learning how to be smaller. He didn't ask more, just handed her the warm cup of coffee and said, "You're safe here, June. I swear on the grave of my brother." She looked at him then, really looked like the weight of those words reached into her bones. That afternoon, they went for a walk along the tree line. Snow was falling in soft flakes, coating the pines like powdered sugar. June moved carefully, always glancing behind her, like the forest held shadows she couldn't forget. "You ever been out here before?" Silas asked, brushing snow off a bent branch so she could pass. She hesitated. "Maybe it feels familiar. Like a dream I used to have." Silas nodded. "Dreams got roots. You follow them long enough, they show you what they grew from." That night, June stood by the fireplace, tracing the cracks in the stone with her eyes. Silas was at the table, writing in his old journal, mostly observations, sometimes questions he didn't know how to say aloud. Then June spoke. "There's something you should know." He set the pencil down. "The man who lit that fire, I think he was looking for me, and I think I used to trust him." The wind groaned outside like some wounded beast. Silas leaned forward. "What kind of man are we talking? A lover?" She didn't answer, just folded her arms tight around herself. He rose, walked slowly over, stopping a few feet away. "June, if you're in trouble, I won't turn you in. I just want to know what's chasing you." She turned, tears welling for the first time. "What if I asked you to take me back into town? Not to turn myself in, just to look at something." Silas blinked. "Tonight," she nodded. "Tonight, outside." The wind picked up, sending dry snow spiraling across the moonlit ground. He grabbed his coat and rifle. "All right, but if we're riding into shadows, I want to know what we're looking for." June met his eyes. A house on the edge of town, yellow shutters, and a woman named Martha. Silas didn't know what any of that meant, but he saw the tremble in her hands and the fear trying to crawl its way out of her mouth. So he saddled the horse, helped her up, and together they rode off into the winter dark toward a name, a memory, and a truth that hadn't yet caught flame. The snow had quieted everything. Hoofbeats barely echoed as Silas and June rode down the trail. The forest swallowed in silver hush. It was just past midnight when they reached the outskirts of Rockbend, where the houses stood farther apart and the windows glowed like scattered stars. June leaned forward in the saddle, eyes scanning the dark as though memory were tucked in every shadow. Then she pointed. There. Silas followed her gaze. A weathered farmhouse stood at the edge of a sloping hill, its porch sagging and roof patched with tin. Faded yellow shutters framed the windows, one of them hanging crooked. The light inside was dim, flickering, not from a lamp but from a fire. "Wait here," June said, slipping off the horse. Silas caught her arm gently. "You sure about this?" She nodded, lips pale. "I need to see if she's still alive." "Who is she to you?" June hesitated. "Then, she raised me." Before Silas could say more, she stepped through the snow, her boots crunching, slow, deliberate. He stayed close, just behind her, hand near his rifle, but hoping like hell he wouldn't need it. June knocked twice, softened for a long breath. Nothing happened. Then the door creaked open. The woman who stood there was older, maybe 60, wrapped in a wool shawl with silver hair braided down one side. Her eyes flickered to June, narrowed, then widened with something like pain. "June," she rasped. June's breath caught. "You remember me?" The woman stepped out, hands trembling. "You're not supposed to be here." "I didn't know where else to go," June said, voice breaking. "You told me if I ever got lost, to come home." Silas watched the woman Martha struggle with something behind her eyes. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in, both of you." The house was warm but sparse. A pot simmered over the fire, and a faded photograph sat on the mantel, a young girl in braids, and a man with a crooked smile. June stared at it for a long time. Martha watched her. "You remember him, my father?" June asked. Martha's face fell. "No, not your father. Your uncle. His name was Aaron." The name hit Silas like a hammer. Aaron Farley. He'd heard it once in the saloon. A gambler, a drunk, a man who'd vanished years ago after a barn fire out in Dakota Territory. And now that he looked at June, there was something familiar about her jawline, her eyes. June sat down slowly, hands clasped tight. "Martha, do you know who set the fire at Henderson's place?" Martha hesitated, then whispered, It was Aaron. Silas stiffened. He's alive. Martha nodded. He came through last week, asking about June. Said he had a score to settle. I told him I hadn't seen her in years, but he didn't believe me. Said he'd find her no matter where she ran. June looked like she might crumble. He used to sing, didn't he? That tune. Whiskey in the Jar, Martha said, her voice almost a whisper. He sang it when he was angry. Silas stepped back, his mind piecing things together. So he followed her, waited till she was alone in that barn, then lit it up. Martha reached out and took June's hand. I never should have let him take you when you were 12. I thought he was your kin, but he wasn't, right? Never was. Silence fell like snow. Then June said, I want to find him. I want to end this. Silas crouched beside her. That ain't your weight to carry alone. June looked at him, eyes rimmed with unshed tears. But it is my past. He's the reason I ran, the reason I forgot who I was. Silas gently took her hand. And maybe now it's time to remember. Martha let them stay the night. In the room June once slept in as a child. The bed was small, the quilt handmade, stitched with faded reds and blues that smelled like lavender and thyme. June ran her fingers across the fabric in the dark, feeling the memories settle back into her bones like it had been waiting all this time. Silas sat in the old rocking chair across the room, his rifle propped by the window. Outside, the snow whispered across the fields, but inside, it was still. He didn't sleep, much never had since the war, but tonight, it wasn't the wind that kept him up. It was June's face, pale and distant, like she was slipping between two versions of herself. He didn't know which one she'd be when morning came. Before dawn, June spoke. He sang that song the night he took me. Silas looked up. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking in her lap. I was 12. He came with a letter that said my mother was dead. Said I had to go with him. Martha didn't know any better. He smelled like tobacco and sweat. I hated his boots. They were too loud. Silas leaned forward. What happened? June swallowed. Hard. He kept me in a wagon for weeks. Said we were looking for land. But he didn't look for land. He looked for cards and whiskey. When he was drunk, he'd make me sing that stupid song. I stopped talking after a while. He said it made things easier. She paused. The only sound was the creak of the chair as Silas shifted closer. One night, we stayed in a barn near Dead Horse Creek. He passed out. I ran. I don't know how far. I ended up in Henderson's fields. The woman, their setter, found me, gave me a name, a new story. I became someone else. Silas's jaw clenched. You were just a child. June nodded slowly. But I still hear that tune. I don't know what I'll do if I hear it again. Silas reached out, took her hand gently. You'll do what you've done every time, survive. Her eyes lifted to meet his, wide and wet. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live. Silas exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then we find him, together. Later that morning, Martha handed Silas an envelope. He left this behind. Said it wasn't for June. Said it was for the man who'd end up picking up her pieces. Silas frowned. The handwriting was jagged, angry. Inside was a single sheet. You think you've saved her, but you've just delayed the fire. Some people are made to burn. I'll be in Dust River. She knows where F. June's lips went white as she read it. There's an old mine shaft south of Dust River. He used to take me there. Said it was his kingdom. Martha stood by the door, arms crossed tight. You go there. You better not go unarmed. Silas nodded. I'm not. As they packed their things, June looked out over the snowy horizon. I'm not doing this for revenge. I just need to look him in the eye and know I'm not afraid anymore. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. That's not revenge. That's healing. By noon they rode out, the snow beginning to melt under a brightening sky. Dust River was a day's ride through cold hills and quiet woods, an old mining town turned ghost by bad veins and worse men. It was the kind of place where people disappeared when they didn't want to be found. That as they crossed the ridgeline and the sun dipped behind the trees, Silas turned to her. You ready? June tightened her grip on the reins. No, but I'm going anyway. And sometimes he thought that was the bravest kind of ready there was. The entrance to the mine was half swallowed by pine and thyme. Rocks had fallen across the old path, and the timber beams at the opening sagged with rot. But it was still standing just as June remembered. Silas dismounted first, scanning the trees. His hand stayed near the rifle slung across his back, but the forest was still. To still. June stayed frozen in the saddle for a long while, eyes fixed on the dark mouth of the mine like it might speak. Her name. Then she whispered, "That smell, creosote and earth. It hasn't changed." Silas nodded. "We don't have to go in, not till you're ready." But June was already moving, boots crunching over the thawing snow. She didn't look back. They stepped inside together, lantern in Silas's hand, throwing golden light onto the damp stone walls. The air was cooler here, and thicker somehow. June's breath came shallow, but she pressed on, fingers trailing the wall like a tether. And then it came, a voice, from deep inside. Low, rough, and off. Key. Musha, rain dum, ado, dum, ada. June froze. Silas turned sharply, lantern swinging. The song echoed like something dead trying to sing again. "It's him," June said, barely breathing. "He's waiting." They followed the sound down a narrow tunnel until the light touched a figure leaning against a rusted minecart. Aaron. Farley looked old and grey in his beard, sunken around the eyes, but the madness hadn't aged a day. He grinned when he saw them. "Well, hell," he said, spreading his arms like a preacher at a broken altar. "The girl came home, and she brought company." Silas stepped forward. "You lit that barn on fire. You tried to kill her." Aaron shrugged. "I wanted to see if she'd still run. Girls always been good at running." June clenched her fists. "You said my mother was dead." Aaron's smile faltered. "She wasn't, was she?" He looked away. "Didn't matter. She didn't come for you, did she?" June took a shaky breath. "Why me, Aaron?" His voice turned sharp. "Because you were easy, quiet, alone. You looked at me like I was someone. You were supposed to protect me," she said. "And I kept you alive," he snapped, "when nobody else wanted you." Silas stepped between them. "That's enough." But June placed a hand on his arm. "No, I need to say this." She walked closer, lantern light dancing across her face. "I used to believe I was broken because of you, that the parts of me that were scared and silent weren't worth keeping. But you didn't break me, you just tried, and I'm done letting your shadow decide who I am." Aaron stared, lips parted. For the first time, he didn't look dangerous, just empty. "You got no fire left in you," he muttered. "No," June said softly, "just light." And with that, she turned her back on him fully. Finally, Silas followed, but before they stepped out of the shaft, he paused. "If you come near her again, I won't walk away next time." Aaron didn't answer. He just sat there, humming that dying song to the dark. Outside, the air felt newer, clean, somehow. June stood at the ridge, eyes wet but steady. "I thought I'd have to face him with hate," she said, "but I didn't. I faced him with truth." Silas smiled faintly. "Truth's the only bullet that never misses." They mounted up again as dusk turned the sky lavender, and when they rode away from that mine, June didn't look back, not even once. What does forgiveness look like when justice never came? Let's talk in the comments. Your voice could help someone heal. They reached Rockbend just as the sky turned amber, gold pouring across the hills like it had forgotten how cruel winter could be. June rode in silence, face unreadable, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Silas didn't press. Some things needed room to settle before they made sense out loud. Back in town, folks moved slower than usual. The fire had shaken people leaving out. Here, where folks were used to loss, Henderson's barn had stood for 30 years, raised by hand and memory. What burned wasn't just wood, it was time. They left the horses at the livery and walked through the quiet streets toward what remained of the Henderson farm. The snow had melted off the blackened beams, revealing a skeleton of what once was. Ash, mixed with the scent of damp earth. Smoke no longer lingered, but its story was still in the air. June stood at the edge of it all, staring down at the charred floorboards. "I shouldn't have come back here," she whispered. Silas stood beside her. "Then why did you?" She hesitated. "Because I remembered something." He waited. "There was a box," she said slowly, "beneath the loft. Sarah Henderson's wife," she said, "if anything ever happened, to find that box. She kept something in it she didn't want anyone else seeing." They moved toward what had once been the back wall. June knelt by a half-burned beam, brushing aside blackened straw and brittle wood. Her hand stilled over a patch of scorched stone. "There," she said. Silas helped her pry loose the slab. Beneath it, somehow spared by the fire and the fall, was a tin box, its edges scorched, but the lid still sealed. June's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter and a photograph. She pulled the photo first, showed a young girl in braids, no older than 10, standing beside Sarah Henderson, and beside them, Aaron Farley, arm around Sarah's waist, smiling like a man who thought he'd won something. June's breath caught. She knew him. Silas frowned. More than knew. Looks like they were together. She unfolded the letter, yellowed with time, corners brittle. Her lips moved silently as she read. Then she handed it to Silas. It was dated 7 years back, addressed to whoever finds this. If I don't make it, his name's not Aaron. It's Wallace Farley. He came here with charm and stories and promises, but he left with something I didn't give: my trust, my money, and that little girl's sense of safety. She won't remember. He made sure of that. But if she ever comes looking, tell her this: she was never unwanted. I tried to fight for her. I just wasn't strong enough. June turned away, tears brimming. She did care, she whispered. Sarah, she wanted me. Silas nodded. She protected you, the only way she could. By hiding you from him, maybe even from yourself. June looked up, voice thick. He changed his name. Lied to everyone. Even to me. How many others? Silas folded the letter gently. Doesn't matter. You're not his story anymore. They buried the box near the old willow behind what remained of the barn. June knelt there a long time, head bowed, palms pressed into the cold earth, like she was letting something go. When she stood, she wasn't trembling. Back at the cabin that night, June sat by the fire, holding the photo in her lap. She traced Sarah's face with a fingertip, then tucked the picture into her journal. Silas poured 2 mugs of coffee. You know, he said quietly, some folks say the fire only takes what was meant to go, leaves behind what still has a purpose. June looked at him, eyes shining with something soft. Then I guess I still have one. Silas met her gaze, warmth spreading in his chest. I'd say you do. They didn't speak much after that, just sat in the hush of the fire, the quiet between them no longer heavy, just full. It started with a coat. June stood in front of the cracked mirror in Silas's cabin, wrapped in an old duster that once belonged to his sister. It didn't fit perfectly to broaden the shoulders. A little worn at the cuffs, but it felt solid, honest, like something that belonged to a woman who had nothing left to prove. She ran a hand through her hair, still uneven from when she'd hacked it shorter months ago, and studied the face looking back. The girl who'd hidden in the loft of a burning barn wasn't there anymore. There was strength now, and sorrow, and something else rising like dawn behind the clouds. Outside, Silas was fixing the front step. He didn't say much, just nodded when she came out, as if he saw the change in her without needing to ask about it. I'm going into town today, June said. Silas looked up. You sure? No, she admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. They rode in together. The road to Rockbend had grown familiar, now the curve around Dry Creek, the broken fence where the wildflowers always pushed through. But today, the town felt different, not because it had changed, because she had. People stared, not out of cruelty, but curiosity. Whispered words followed her across the boardwalk, but she kept her chin high. For the first time, June didn't want to disappear. At the general store, she bought thread, a bar of lavender soap, and paper for writing. The shopkeeper, a woman named Ruth, gave her a long look. You're the girl from the fire, ain't you? I am, June said evenly. Ruth hesitated. Heard you were dead. Not yet, June said with a small, dry smile. At the saloon, she waited outside while Silas spoke with the sheriff. Folks walked past, some offering cautious nods, others just looking away. And then a voice called her name. June. She turned. A young man stood there, barely 20, thin as a rail, with wide, startled eyes. It's me, he said, stepping closer. Wes, Sarah's nephew. June blinked. Memory stirred barefoot summer afternoons, laughter echoing through the barn rafters. A boy with a slingshot and a gap-toothed grin. You remember me? He asked, almost shy. I think I do, she said. You used to steal peaches. He grinned. Still do. Wes grew quiet. They said you just vanished. Sarah never stopped looking. She put up a cross by the creek. For you. June swallowed hard. She saved me. I just didn't know it then. I'm glad you're not dead, he said. And I'm real sorry. About the fire. Me too, she whispered. That afternoon, she walked back to the Henderson land. Not to grieve this time, to rebuild. The ash had cooled, but beneath it, the ground was soft, forgiving. June knelt and planted a line of seeds. Mostly, she didn't know if they'd take, but it felt like a start. Silas joined her after a while, handing her a canteen. "You gonna stay in town?" he asked. "I think I might. You're sure it's not too soon? It's already been too long." They sat together in the fading light, watching the wind stir the soil. "You've changed," he said quietly. June smiled, tired but sure. "I think I finally showed up." He looked at her, something soft and unspoken passing between them. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow if they let it. The first hard rain came 3 days after June returned to town. It washed the soot from the stones behind the Henderson barn, soaked into the earth where she'd planted the wildflower seeds, and beat against Silas's cabin roof like a drum remembering old songs. June sat by the window, fingers resting lightly on a small oilcloth-wrapped bundle Ruth from the general store had handed her that morning. "She left this with me," Ruth had said, eyes soft. "Told me to wait till you were ready." June had just stared at it in her palms, too stunned to ask how Sarah had known she'd ever return. Now, as thunder rolled over the valley, she unwrapped it. Inside was a folded letter, weathered at the edges, and a silver pinsmall, delicate, shaped like a willow branch. June pressed it to her chest for a moment before opening the page. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Sarah's, if you're reading this, it means you came back, and that means I was right to believe in you." June's hands trembled. "I know he found you, and I know I couldn't stop him. I tried. June, I swear it on my mother's grave. The night you ran, I went after you, but I was too slow. I searched every day after that, and when I couldn't find you, I left pieces of you behind, little things, like the pin, the locket, so that if you ever remembered, you'd know who you really were. And there's something else, something I never told you, because I thought it might only hurt. The night you disappeared, you weren't alone in that barn." June stopped breathing. "Silas Boone found you first. He brought you to me. He said he heard a child crying. I thought maybe it was a miracle. But he just tipped his hat and disappeared into the dark. Said some folks were better at fixing fences than raising kids." June looked across the room at Silas. He sat by the fire, oiling the old rifle, unaware. Or maybe not. Maybe he'd always known. That man. He saved you once before. You were too young to remember. But I hope someday, if you ever see him again, you'll look at him and know. Not everyone who walks away is running. Some are just waiting for the right time to come back. Be brave, little willow. You bend, but you never break. The letter ended with 3 words that hit harder than the storm. "I loved you." June wiped her cheeks. The storm outside blurred into the storm inside. Silas looked up then, like he'd felt something shift. "You all right?" he asked. She stood, walked to him slowly, and sat on the floor by his feet, like a child remembering home. "You lied to me," she said softly. Silas frowned. "About what?" "You didn't just save me from the fire. You saved me before it too. Sarah said you found me that first night, that you brought me back." His shoulders tensed. For a long moment, he didn't speak. "I didn't think you'd want to know," he said finally. "Figured it'd just tangle things worse. Why didn't you stay?" "Because I wasn't the man you needed then," he whispered, "and I didn't want to break what someone else might be strong enough to carry." June looked up at him, heart beating like a drum. "But you came back." "I came back," he echoed, voice thick, "and I'd do it again." Outside, the rain eased. Inside, the fire crackled warm and low. June leaned her head against his knee, eyes closing, her voice barely above the silence. "I think you were always the man I needed. I just wasn't ready to know it." Silas touched her hair, so gently it might have been a prayer. They rode out before sunrise. Silas didn't ask where they were going. He just saddled the horses, packed a bit of bread, and handed June her coat. Without a word, some choices didn't need explanation, they carried themselves. The road curved west through the hills, where the snow had begun to soften, and the thaw left the ground dark and heavy. Birds called low in the trees, as if waking carefully. The air smelled of pine and old stone. June led them to the edge of Dry Creek, where the waters ran slow and cold. Just beyond, under a crooked cottonwood, stood a single headstone, small, weathered, unmarked. She dismounted slowly, knees stiff from the ride. Silas followed behind, silent as ever. June stood before the grave for a long while, arms wrapped around herself, like she was holding the girl she used to be. "Sarah carved this herself," she said finally. with a kitchen knife and a bottle of whiskey. Wes told me, said she cried for hours when she finished, then never spoke of it again. Silas took off his hat, bowed his head. They thought I was gone, so they buried what was left of me in their hearts. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small wooden carving, fresh, carefully etched the night before, a name burned into its surface with the tip of Silas's fire poker, June Willow. She knelt and placed it gently at the foot of the old stone, then sat back on her heels, hands in the dirt. I've spent so long hiding from who I was, she said, running from what happened, but this grave, it doesn't belong to me anymore. She looked up at Silas, eyes steady. I'm not dead. I'm just beginning. He nodded. Then it's time to stop grieving what never got a chance to live. She reached into her coat and pulled out Sarah's silver willow pin, pressing it into the soft earth beside the marker. She gave me this name, June whispered, and now I'm claiming it, not as a girl lost, but as a woman returned. They sat there together for a long time, wind curling through the grass like an old friend. Later, as the sun climbed higher, they walked back to the horse's dot at the edge of the creek. Silas touched her arm. What now? June looked out at the hills. I want to build something. He raised a brow. Like a cabin. She smiled faintly. Like a life. They rode slow on the way home, not because the road was rough, but because there was no longer a fire chasing them. The danger was past, the ashes were behind. What lay ahead was theirs to shape. Spring came early to Rockbend that year. The snows melted into soft green hills, and the first wildflowers peeked through the ash where Henderson's barn once stood. June knelt beside the new growth most mornings, fingers brushing the petals like they were old friends come home. There was color now, not just in the land but in her face, her voice, her days. She'd rented the old mercantile's back room, turned it into a little workshop with lace curtains and a chipped teapot that never stayed empty. The townsfolk didn't call her the girl from the fire anymore. They called her June, just June, as if they'd always known her. Some evenings she walked to the creek behind Silas's cabin, sat on the stones where the light turned everything gold. He'd join her sometimes, hands calloused from fence work, a new line in his brow for every week. He pretended not to need company, but June saw through him now. One night, as the stars came out, she said, "You don't have to stay quiet, Silas." He didn't look at her, just flicked a pebble into the water. "I've spent a long time trying not to say the wrong thing." She turned toward him, her voice soft. "Then say the truth." He was quiet for a long moment. "Then, I think I've been in love with you since the night I carried you out of that barn. You were half smoke and tears, but your eyes were fierce, like you weren't going to let the fire win." June's breath caught. "I don't remember that night, but I think my heart does." He finally looked at her. "You don't owe me anything." "No," she said gently, "but I'd like to give you something anyway." She reached into her coat and pulled out a single envelope addressed not to her, but to him, the back sealed in wax. "Sarah's wax. I found this hidden in her journal," June said. "It's for you." Silas took it slowly, hands almost shaking. He opened it under the moonlight. "Silas, if you're reading this, it means you stayed, and maybe that's enough. I never thanked you for saving her that first time, but I knew you would again. You were always the quiet kind of good, the kind that never asks for anything. But I hope, someday, you let yourself have something back, something soft, something true." Her name is June now. She's strong, but even strong girls need a home. Maybe you could be that, if you're willing. Silas folded the letter, eyes wet. "She always saw too much." June smiled. "So do I." They didn't speak after that, just sat shoulder to shoulder, watching the fireflies blink across the grass. When he finally took her hand, it wasn't a question. It was a promise, quiet and steady, like everything he'd ever done. Weeks later, a new barn stood where the old one had burned. June painted the beams herself, carved tiny willows into the doorframe. She hung Sarah's pin above the hearth, and planted a row of yellow shutters along the windows. Silas moved in without ever saying the words, just brought his tools one day, then his coat, then the rocking chair. They didn't rush things. Love, after all, didn't need a blaze. It just needed warmth. And when the first child was born, a boy with his father's hands and his mother's eyes, June named him Samuel, after the fire that tried to end her. Because some flames destroy, and some teach us how to live again. You ever turned your pain into something beautiful, or found love when you least expected it? Share below. Your story might be the light someone else needs. If this story touched you, follow 4 more tales of healing, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to begin again.